What has worried me all these decades is not that individuals choose to live as they wish to, and I would not wish them to be pilloried or discriminated against. I would wish them to be treated with equal respect. But the problem that I perceived to be developing and has now become the kind of accepted situation was that the very idea of normative living went didn't just disintegrate, it was destroyed deliberately on the basis.
I wrote an essay on this. I titled Normophobia.
Right, on the basis that to be normative, to say that you should have social or moral or cultural norms, was in itself discriminatory, because by definition, and this is true, people who choose not to live by those norms are not normative, they're not normal. And so I was being accused of saying effectively, you're saying to me I'm not normal. I mean, so when it's brought down to the particular, to the individual who says, I might agree with you, but where does it leave me? How can I have a happy life? How can I have a fulfilled life? I can't answer that on a personal level.
It ought to be possible, you would think, to acknowledge that some people are outliers to the norm, and also to acknowledge that there are such things as norms.
That's how I would wish to be. So I have said to these people collectively over time, I absolutely sympathise with where you're coming from. Really, I do. It's genuine. However, you are sawing off the branch on which you are sitting. Because if you think that the kind of society that you are now not just endorsing, but bringing about, if you think that that society is going to uphold the values that you depend on, of freedom, of compassion, of a cohesive society in which people look after each other, you are very mistaken, because it's not going to be like that. You are going to be the victims of what's coming, and your children are going to be the victims of what's coming.
What I find so fascinating about this, that perhaps we can characterise as normophobia, is that in a sense it's the ideology of the machine. It's the ideology of applying technology to liberate ourselves from every possible given, because that's really what underwrites it. You look again and again and again at what allows us, in theory at least, to escape, the normative patterns of human reproduction, for example, or to escape the normative limits on material abundance, for example. Everywhere you look, again and again, it's some technological innovation or other, or a whole plethora of technological innovations that underwrites that and allows us to claim.
Pill.
The contraceptive pill actually is a paradigmatic example. Now, I've framed that as our entry into the transhumanist era, because that's the point at which we began to apply this ideology of the machine to ourselves, and to act as if it were possible to escape even the givens of our own embodied existence as men and women, as humans who need to reproduce, etc., and so on. And and then this has gone into even wilder territory the further it goes on. So what begins as women using synthetic hormones to escape to have sex without pregnancy, becomes men claiming the right to take the same synthetic hormones so they can present themselves as women, and that then becomes people using further technologies to escape the givens of how human reproduction as such works, and then from that you have more contemporary startups where people are saying, no, actually we can just edit the human genome, and we can optimize babies for intelligence, or I don't know, perhaps we could engineer entirely new. And so what begins with the applying technology to wage war on human nature, really to wage war on the human form. The normative human physiological form becomes in theory a limitless opportunity for technological innovation and all of it is encapsulated in this ideological war on normativity as such. But what I think is so fascinating, just to complete that thought, is the way it doesn't seem to matter how hard people wage war on these norms, these really fundamental givens of human existence. They just keep coming back. There's that quote from Horace, you can drive nature out with a pitchfork and still she comes back. We've spent, it's half a century since the contraceptive pill. And the early utopians, they all thought that it would do away with sexist double standards. They thought it would do away with, and everybody would just be able to be the same, and we'd all live in this sort of polymorphously perverse kind of sex utopia. Didn't happen. Either young people are just not having very much sex at all, or the differences between the sexes in terms of their desires and yearnings in mate formation is more extreme than ever. You know, you have these dating apps which are optimized for a certain kind of promiscuous male sexuality, and which is just disastrous for both sexes because it's sort of optimizing the same things and has kind of turned human intimacy into a commodity. And in all of that, you know, the fact that we're men and we're women hasn't gone away. You know, people, and if anything, today, young people now, I think, are more cognizant and more attuned to, and less utopian about the irreducible nature of sex dimorphism than they were 10 years ago, let alone 25. When I think back to the boomer generation, a lot of the boomers really were utopian because they could imagine a future in which sex dimorphism had been done away with.
Yeah, it's my generation that's all at fault. It's true.
Yeah, hashtag not all boomers. Very clearly not all boomers, but some of them certainly. And yet 50 years in, it hasn't worked. And I speak to a great many young people now who can just see it. They've stopped pretending that it can be abolished. You know, there are dissenting factions there, but there are a growing number of young people who are like, no, obviously this is a thing, and you know, we've done our best to technologize it away, and it's just not going away.
Yeah.
And just returning to our theme of technology and upheaval, and tradition, it seems to me that we will not cease from exploration, as Eliot said, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And that's what's happening with the young people after half a century of experimentation in sex dimorphism.
He also said that liberalism will ultimately destroy itself. Because
I think he was absolutely right.
So you can't have both. You can't have both. Either we're going to come back to where we started, which is probably good, or we're going to destroy ourselves. Which is it?
I don't know. Well, okay. I think the way I would square that circle is to say we can destroy modernity without destroying humans.
I hope so.
And I think that's.
When I say I hope so, I'm sure that's true. Of course, that's true. And in fact, it must be true because if we're going the way we are dehumanizing all the time. When you talk about the machine and the onslaught on the normative, the ultimate point of that is dehumanization. We cannot afford to go there without literally extinguishing ourselves. Yeah. But the question is, can we get back to that? I mean, all these young people, this is a great source of hope, that all these young people are gravitating back to something approaching what I would call sanity. But at the same time, you know, the levers of the culture are not being pulled in that direction. And the kind of moral leaders of the culture are not giving a kind of roadmap for all these young people. You know, where do they go with this? You know, they've all understood, okay, these people have all understood that this is a dead end, that we've gone down the rabbit hole, that we're in a trap, that it's done terrible damage to me and so on and so forth. Okay, great. That's fantastic. That's really a source of optimism. But that has to be harnessed somehow by somebody, and that is called, you know, moral, spiritual and cultural leadership. Where is it? It ain't there at the moment.
It's not there yet. I mean, here's a bleaker scenario for how we end up back where we started and know the place for the first time. I forget who did the research, but there's fairly robust evidence that shows who's having kids. There's talk everywhere now about the fertility crisis, so-called. I'm not so sure it's a crisis. It seems, in the sense that it seems to me like a rational collective response to an intolerable situation.
Well, it may be rational, but it's not a crisis.
For modernity, it's crisis. But so who's having kids? The people who are having kids tend to be they tend to be people who don't use very much technology, and they tend to be people with strong religious faith. Those people are still having kids. Everybody else is in the process of deleting themselves from the gene pool.
Yes.
I mean, this is a dark way of putting it, and I don't actually think any of this is funny, but this is in
social
fact
Darwinism in reverse.
Well, precisely, and what that looks like, if you run that scenario over 2 or 3 generations, what you end up with is effectively the human species is still there. Human species is alive and well and absolutely fine. But what has deleted itself is modern high-tech society, simply because it just refused to have kids.
Well, I think that's one way of looking at it. But
what you end up with again is communities of the low tech and the very religious.
But there's another way of looking at it, which is to say that every country, every nation, is failing in the West is failing to reproduce itself.
That's absolutely right.
And consequently, it's going to be replaced by something else. Now, I mean, in my view, what's going to replace it, if it doesn't stop doing this, is the culture that understands what's going on better than the West understands what's going on, which is predatory Islamism, and it's moving in. And that's what we're going to see, and that's the great struggle that's that's already happening. It's about to happen. Now, if I can bang the drum for the place where I spend most of my time now, which is the state of Israel. Israel is the one Western country which bucks the trend. In Israel, there are approximately between 3 and 4 babies per woman being born. This has nothing to do with people being ultra-religious. This is to do with with Israelis wanting their culture and their country, their nation and their culture that it represents to continue. They are a people who are galvanized by the will to live, are based on hope in the future. Now, this is what the West has lost collectively, the sense that it is worth surviving, that there is something to live for, and that it is a hopeful thing to live for, because what you should live for to perpetuate your society is something that you should absolutely invest in, and you should want children to continue that because you think it's great. It is something which enables you as a person to flourish. It enables your society to flourish. It enables civilized values to flourish. You believe in it. You love it. And you love the traditions that have made it. You understand that to keep it going, you have to keep those traditions alive. In other words, you have to educate by transmitting the culture down through the generations. These are things which have not just been lost, they've been deliberately destroyed. Now, that's where the West has got to come back to in order to perpetuate itself. Otherwise, it's finished as a culture. That's what worries me, that there is no leadership currently which perceives this. So on the one hand, you have this, in my view, fantastically optimism-creating situation in which, as you describe, loads of young people are getting it on that level, and also on political level, the rise of populism in Britain and Europe. Now, you may hate Reform and Nigel Farage. You may well think that a number of these populist parties and individuals in Europe are actually very dangerous. They are authoritarian. Okay, fine. That's not the point. The point I'm making is that there are millions and millions of people who get it, who want their culture to continue, who understand that what's at stake is Western civilization, Western culture, their Western nation state, which embodies all those values. They love them, they admire them, they want them to continue. And that's a great source of hope too. So this is what I rely on, all these millions of people who really do get it at various levels of this conversation that we're having. The difficulty that we're all up against is that there is no leadership at the moment which is brave enough or insightful enough or connected enough or educated enough to get it and to say, okay, guys, we've gone wrong. This is how we're going to go forward. And we're not going to go back to an age where people really were persecuted for not being normative. We're not going to go back to that. But we are no longer going to go down the road of saying there are no norms. Because if we don't have norms, then we don't have a society. And if we don't have norms based on our particular culture and traditions, then we no longer have this particular society, which is the best society.
If you think these conversations are valuable, would you do us a favor and please like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, you help us get these conversations out to a wider audience by telling YouTube that people are interested in this. Also, you can go to socratesinthecity.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can check back every week. There's new stuff here every week. Thank you for tuning in.